I have three rapid fire questions for you, Grisha. This is going to be difficult because I'm going to ask you to answer these questions pretty briefly and then we will deep dive them. So, as a world recognized professional dog trainer that specializes in reactivity, do you believe that traditional aversive tools like shot collars and prong collars, for example, can be problematic?
Yes.
What's a common mistake that you see that pet parents make that can hurt or damage our relationship with our dogs?
Lack of paying attention
And why do you think that leash pulling is such a struggle for so many of us?
because dogs have four legs and they walk faster.
I love it. All right. So now that I have everyone hooked for what's to come, and yes, we will deep dive these topics, welcome to the safe space where we learn how to train and feed our dogs better. And I'm actually nervous for today's live, I have to admit, because I really look up to the work that you do, Grisha. And within the professional dog community, you are an absolute legend. So I'm so honored to have you here today. And
Thanks, Rachel.
yeah, absolutely. And so, a little bit of an introduction, though I'm sure everyone watching knows who you are or at least familiar with you. Have a little bit of a bio that I can put on the screen. There we go. Grisha Stewart, you are an author, international speaker, and obviously professional dog trainer specializing in dog reactivity, though your tips, your theories, your concepts apply to basically all dog training tips and things that we're looking for. And you are really known for your BAT or behavior adjustment training book and concept. And the really cool thing, I have it on the screen here, is you are offering um, a free copy of this book for my community, which is I'm very grateful for. And we're going to talk about that book and kind of highlights of what's in that book. So if you want to check that out when you're watching this, check the description below. So let's just jump into the questions because I want to deliver as much value and answer as many questions. So it seems like the most issues I've heard about and hear about are around dog reactivity, excessive barking, and leash pulling are kind of the three main things I want to cover, though I do have a couple more topics we'll go through. But I want to start with a very basic question that I don't even know that I could answer, which is what does dog reactivity even mean? Like, what is a reactive dog?
hmm So that's a great question. I actually don't use the phrase reactive dog. I do use dog reactivity. But I try not to label the dog. It's sort of like saying, well, anyway, it's just I like to avoid labels because it
Okay.
tends to make it so that people don't see that it's a situational. It's based on learning versus like this is the type of dog that it is. And so by reactivity, I mean that the dog is overreacting. So in a certain situation, you would expect XYZ set of behavior, and the dog is doing either a lot more or a lot less. Like they're really shut down or they're over the top excited. So there's kind of like this, like bell curve for behavior. So reactivity to me is like the two ends of the spectrum in terms of either over or under emotionality.
Okay, so instead of being a reactive dog, maybe we're a dog with big feelings in certain situations. Is that a kind of a good way to
That's
describe
the
it?
way to say it. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. So do you think
Dog
that
overreacts.
overreact? Yeah. Do you think that dogs that have reactive tendencies can see dramatic improvement with positive reinforcement only? And I want to preface this because I've really just been going in a rabbit hole with your content, which, for the record, anybody watching this, I have all of Grisha's information linked in the description below from her courses. She has so much content to help with basically any struggle you might have. And you had this article written about the quadrants, which maybe we'll get into a little bit later. It's really confusing to me, honestly. So when I say positive, it's for general terminology. Do you think that a dog with reactive tendencies, strong reactive tendencies, can show significant improvement using positive only work?
Yes. So what I would like to say is basically like quadrants aside, just think of it in terms of it is totally possible without using pain, intimidation, force, any of those things to allow a dog to learn in situations where they feel safe, where they feel supported, and where they have a chance to explore, these are the places where we undo trauma. And trauma is really a huge source for reactivity. There are other sources as well, but I would say that the big bulk of dogs are either under socialized or they've experienced trauma. And that, so if we're trying to create ways for dogs to live in harmony in society, that the way to do that is to live in harmony with the dog.
Okay. Why do you think so many trainers, and no, nothing negative towards any other trainers, but why do you think so many trainers rely on more negative reinforcement techniques?
I think we do what we know and what we learn. And I think that there is a huge tendency in the human species to use punishment. It's something that we use a lot more as primates than dogs do, actually. So there's some neuroscience on in terms of ways of learning that we learn a little bit better from punishment than they do. But either way, punishment isn't really the right pathway that sort of gives us the most sort of the best social skills, as you can see maybe by the state of the world. So I apply what I do to all species, really, and so I see the commonalities of us. So dogs and mammals and all of us, we learn better in these ways. And to circle back to your actual question, why do they do it? It's because it's reinforcing. So in that moment when we and by we I mean a person who was to use punishment. So if a person uses punishment, the dog does stop what they're doing or they do something different in that moment. And so it feels good to us, like we have our sense of safety back or our sense of control. Safety, control, predictability, these are things that dogs need as well as us. And so punishment is a tool, it's a type of reactivity. And so it's human reactivity. And so it works in its way, like just like the dog barking, it kind of works to scare people away, but ultimately it doesn't lead to better relationships.
Okay, so that kind of leads me to my next question is, do you feel like using these tools, and I promise this whole live won't be about these tools, I'm just curious,
Mhm.
do you feel like using these tools can damage, I mean, you said that you believe it can damage our relationship. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so for a couple of reasons. One is it's we're looking at things that the dog is doing wrong, so we're really focused on that aspect. So in terms of our own relationship with the dog and our perception of the dog, when we're in a punishment mindset, we're going to be looking for more and more things to punish versus more and more things to reinforce. So that's one just aspect of the relationship. The other is the building of trust. And the tools are sort of created so that it distances the dog from like they don't always know that it's you that's doing the punishment if someone were to be applying punishment. And so in that way, sometimes dogs don't know it's you, and so they feel that they can still trust the human. But there are lots of dogs that for example, will bite at the handler when they get a leash correction. This is not something that we experience in the positive dog training world. And I remember going to a workshop, and I go to all kinds of workshops because I think it's important for me to know, like, what are the other ways of training that even if I don't use them. And I remember at that workshop seeing it explained that when the dog bites you, because they were using a prong collar, and so they gave a correction, the dog bit at the leash or bit at the person. And it was just like matter of course, this happens a lot. And what you do is you lift the dog in the air. And so to have this be like a normal and expected, like, side effect of training, that's not something we experience in the positive reinforcement world. And so that's one of the many ways that I know that it's harmful to relationship.
Wow. And what do you say when, and I know the answer because I saw a YouTube video you did on this, but what do you say on to the trainers or to the pet parents that come to you and say, well, my dog does well on a prong collar and my other trainer had me put it on my wrist and it wasn't that painful. So, and they're still excited to go on their walks with it. Like how do we kind of help pet parents understand what's going on there?
Hmm. So I try to do what's best for the dog, like what's the overall least harm inducing. So even if this particular tool, just like going into that if land, even if it weren't causing harm, it's still not the best, right?
Okay.
And if you put a prong collar in your neck, which I've done in one of my YouTube videos, it hurts. Like, it's not pleasant. And to say that dogs have fur and it makes it like better, it actually isn't. Dogs are there are more nerve endings, I think, on a dog's neck than ours even, and they're usually put high and tight. And so to those people, I would say you are doing the best you can by your dog, and you were told that this is a good tool, and I applaud you for looking for a way to help your dog have a comfortable life. And there are other ways in which you can do better. So it's always this process of learning. We always do the best we can, and then we learn something else, and we're like, oh, I don't think that works. And there's a little rebellion, and then it's like, okay, let me try it, and then it turns out it actually works. So it would be. I just encourage folks who might be using that already to not feel terrible for too long. You can feel a little terrible if you want to, and just to move on. Like, you did the best you could, and go, from there into learning other ways of being with the dogs. And
Right.
it may be, you might need a different trainer if they're doing that, because sometimes the trainer won't be open to learning. And so as you learn, you may need to shift to somebody else or find a trainer who is capable of shifting with you, and that would be even better.
And one of the questions I want to get to, but not yet, is what are some of the questions we can ask when we're looking for a trainer to work with so we can find ones that are like you? I know you have a resource on your website, but kind of some telling questions. Before that though, why do you think that reactivity in dogs is, or at least to me, seems so common?
So one thing is that dogs are restrained, so they're in situations that are really abnormal, right? So if you were sort of chained to your desk at work, you might start to get reactive as well. Or like, just like the fact that they can't freely move, because dogs will see each other from very far away, or they'll see a trigger or some sort from very far away, and they'll start moving in a way that brings them to a sense of safety
Right.
and to navigate that social situation. And on leash, they can't do that as much. And so there's a lot more on leash reactivity. That's one thing. And then, we have them in these artificial situations in which they're not socialized as much as they could be. Yeah. So I would say it's totally normal in today's society that dogs become reactive. It's just a really hard thing to put up with, and so I'm always surprised that there's not more reactive dogs, to be honest. And they can, we can learn ways to make it so that they don't have to, but it's sort of a default for a lot of dogs.
Yeah. And I heard someone say once that kind of stuck with me is that, especially being on social media, we see a lot of these dogs that are at the outdoor patios and the parks and walking and seeming to be so social and okay with being around other people and dogs. But the reality is, for every one of those, there's probably 10 more that aren't as comfortable for that, because that kind of behaviors can be abnormal in a sense that that's, as you said, they're kind of restrained and it's just kind of based on their behavior. Do you kind of agree with that statement?
Yeah,
That
that
maybe
makes
our expectations are a little too much for some dogs, of course, not all.
Yeah, and I think also as humanity is shifting into more awareness, like more somatic awareness of our own bodies and how comfortable we are in situations, and learning to sort of unwind some of these systems that say like you have to behave in this certain way, then I find that people are able to give their dogs a little bit more grace as well, and say, oh, you know what, we could walk 2 feet to the right and you would feel a lot more comfortable. Let's do that. So yeah.
So I think that's a good segue into leash pulling. That's probably the number one question I was asked when I said I was going to be chatting with you. And you have specific, I guess I would say, protocols within your BAT book around leash tips. And I get that this could be a 2 hour long topic, but let's go back to the original question and allow you to deep dive a bit on that, which is, why do you think so many of us are struggling with our dogs pulling on leash?
So, like I said, partially we're just slower, and we tend to sort of think as the humans that we are the ones that are always going to say which way to go. And there's so much to explore in the world that when I take a dog out on a walk, there are different kinds of walks. There's walks where it's like I am directed and I just want the dog to get from point A to point B, and that's with positive reinforcement, and I just reinforce the heel and train that. So that's one piece, and that's pretty standard across positive dog training. There's lots of different ways to do that. I have a video called Walk With Me that includes that. And then this next part, which is unique to BAT. So basically, with BAT, we have a whole set of skills of teaching people how to use a long leash. So I usually walk dogs on about 15-foot leash, or 5 meters if you have listeners in abroad. And that gives dogs a little bit more room to move. And it also gives us a chance to allow for safety and freedom and then still have some control when we need it. It has all the control that we need when we need it, and that freedom for the dog, or that sense of freedom. And I developed that initially because I had been working as a professional trainer for maybe 5 years by then. It's been about 20 years now. And I had torn my right shoulder from this, like, I've just this vision, like envision this sort of helicopter of a dog, basically just like going everywhere. And I hurt my shoulder. And so I decided that I needed a different approach to how to walk dogs. And I didn't want the approach of giving leash corrections. And also, by the way, I've heard that that's really hard on the body. Just the using punishment is actually very hard on the human body as well. Friends who have shifted over and they're like, oh my God, this is so much easier on me. And anyway, so basically it's the leash skills are like how to hold it, how to move in such a way that you are in communication with the dog rather than kind of going the opposite of what they want. So the two of you kind of navigate together rather than it being like just one or just the other.
So how do you respond when somebody says, "Oh, well, the dog should just be following me. They don't need if I allow them to lead the way in any way, shape, or form, they're going to believe that they're in charge and they're not going to listen, etc." How do you respond to that?
So this is a narrative that's been really sticky since about World War II, and maybe a little sooner before that. But World War II, there were a lot of dogs that were trained for the military, and a lot of trainers came back from that situation and taught families how to train dogs. And so I don't personally need a dog to march with me like we're in the military. I do not have strict hierarchy in which like bombing is going to happen and I need to tell a dog to lay down right now. And so I mean it's nice to be able to have heel sometimes, right? So it's like we need to just get past something. And the walk is really for them. Like I get to go out walking whenever I want to. The dog can only go walking when I'm there, except for, in the backyard or whatever. And so yeah, it's so much more tiring for the dog. Like they get a lot more exercise this way. They get a lot more mental stimulation and enrichment. It's just a much more fulfilling experience. And the dog is not trying to take over my life. Like the last time my dog did an email for me, um,
Well, wait, maybe you're onto something there
they
because I
want to
could
take
use some
over
help
my
with
life.
email.
Go ahead, right? Exactly. So yeah, so it's dogs are very much like people in that they are very flexible about learning culture. And so if you put them in a culture of hierarchy and patriarchy and all the things, they will find a way to fit into that. If you give them a culture that's more egalitarian, where we work on making good choices together that serve the entire community of an interspecies family, then they will be okay with that too. Like they will fit into whichever section. That's why dogs live with humans so well, is that they're adaptive. And so we don't have to make our life more militaristic in order to have dogs. We can actually fold dogs into our family and also learn from them as a separate species. So
That's powerful. And for a little bit of a personal experience, I'll never forget. I told you a little bit before this about a trainer I'm working with my nervous Marlowe, who can be a bit reactive in her tendencies. In our first session, I walk up, the trainer's walking up, and she's like, "Is that a 6 foot leash?" I'm like, "Yep." She's like, "All right, let's switch out to a long lead." And my first thought was like, "Oh man, like if I give her more freedom, if I allow her to be on a 10, 15 foot lead, then she's never going to know heel." And fast forward to now, our walks are the most enjoyable experience for both of us because she gets to go. I use a long lead almost exclusively with her now. And we just practice like for 10, 20, 30 seconds at a time. It's like we'll practice on a heel so that she understands that concept. And then I'm like, go sniff, girl, go enjoy. And then I just kind of, keep that lead. I'm still practicing and learning that, but keep that
Mhm.
lead kind of in control so I don't trip over it. But man,
Mhm.
not only did it make walks less stressful because I wasn't so focused on this like malicient, as you kind of described it, position for her to be so perfect when she's going through behavior mod, right? Like our focus for us, at least, even now, all these months later, is helping rewire her brain to be less worried about the world. And so here I am trying to like keep her in this focused world. She's probably nervous and scared. And now that I've let her have a little bit more freedom and autonomy, safely, of course,
Mhm.
uh, the heel came so much more naturally. Like
Mhm.
I set this session up to kind of learn how to get her to walk on leash a little bit better. And not only does her heel work so much better now, she pulls so much less. Like it's almost giving her more freedom, allowed her to come into her own and then work with me better. So almost improved our relationship, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Absolutely. I was thinking of, I'm circling back a little bit to your previous question and this one, and that um, I watched this webinar about dogs who live on their own, so without humans, right? And the amount of reactivity is basically zero, right? And none of those dogs are healing. So like there's nobody to heal with, and they're still they're also not reactive. So yeah, it's interesting that the expectations that we think as humans, right? And that if once you gave her more freedom, she was like, oh, actually, now that I'm feeling a little more grounded, I'm wanting to check in with you.
Yeah,
So
and just allowing her to safely and with distance at first look
mhm.
at things that made her nervous, and then just allow her to process that with her brain. It's just powerful. So, going back to one question I get with long leads, people. Well, first off, let me ask you this: what are your
Sure.
thoughts on retractable leashes?
So I have two minds of that. So the one that's very thin, there's really kind of no purpose for that one. The one that has the band that you can still grab if you need to, in some situations, like if people are really having a hard time managing all the leash, then I'll have people do that with like a glove on one hand or gloves in both hands, so they can grab the leash easily if they need to, so that it's not putting pressure on the dog at all times. Like the key really, if you do have a retractable leash, is that it's loose unless you're actually trying to get the dog to come back to you. So if you just have it unlocked and it's going in and out, it doesn't quite serve, like it's actually kind of teaching them to pull. And one of the things that I looked at was, as I was, I observe dogs and people a lot. And one of the things I realized is that the retractable leashes do serve people. Like they really like the idea of the dog just like going in and out. And so that's why we have the leash skills, so that people can actually have that same sort of freedom for their dogs, but without that side effect of the pulling.
So, I, can you help paint a picture a little bit about what it would look like if I'm getting started to use bat leash skills and kind of what that would look like?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the first thing I would teach with bat leash skills is just simply how to hold the leash. And I always have people we teach the handle first, so you don't let go unless you want to. So kind of threading the hand through the handle and then gripping it. And then, holding in the other hand, relaxing the arms. So getting this like basic posture. And then I teach them how to shorten and lengthen the leash. I can only do so much really without a
I
leash
know
here.
without it here, but
Yeah.
okay. And I'll have your walk with me course and your leash videos. You have so many in the description below for people, but just kind of describing what this process looks like, I think is helpful for many.
Thanks. Yeah, and there's like a stop pulling class, so it's a big class on pulling, and there's a section of that that's free in the website,
Cool.
and that has some of the leash skills as well. So yeah, so the leash, I either do it this way or with the leash belay, which maybe we'll get to later, um, but basically learning how to kind of loop the leash over your hands so that it doesn't ever end up being wrapped around the fingers, because we want to make sure those tender fingers do not get broken. And a lot of times people, even with the 6 foot leash, will just like wrap the leash around the hand. And that's pretty dangerous for the person. And yeah. And so then we practice like a slow stop. So gently bringing the dog to a stop by kind of like putting the brakes on, like squeezing down on the leash rather than just like holding it all at once, and how to do your body so that you're a little bit stronger. Generally speaking, it's sort of like snowboarding. So you want to have like sort of snowboarding position where your one foot is pointing toward the leash and the other one is perpendicular, center of gravity low. Anyway, so all of these skills are really just these if you look at each one, they end up either giving the human a little bit better physics over the dog, if when it comes to it, or being able to fluidly manage the leash to be able to let the line in and out in a way that the dog can just feel free.
And do you think after we learn kind of how to hold and handle the leash, and let's say I'm sitting here and I'm struggling with leash pulling, do you think step one is kind of switching over to a long lead and really practice on letting the leash out, being able to pull it back in, holding it safely, and just kind of allowing our dog a little bit of initial freedom, and then start potentially practicing on heels if that becomes necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to sort of do both simultaneously. So, like you said, on the walks, it'll be a little bit of this, like mostly the free walking, the bat style walking, and then 20 seconds of heel work, and then back to freestyle walking, just so that your dog does check in. The easiest way to do that, though, is just do the bat style walking, and if your dog ever looks at you, give them a treat, and then just like that's a simple instruction, you'll end up with way, way, way better walks. So it doesn't ever technically have to heel, but I also really like hand targeting. So teaching a dog to just follow a hand target, because often heel is only needed for like 10 seconds at a time just to get past something. And so following their nose, kind of following a target can be really helpful. I don't know if that answered that the way you were asking.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to give some actionable kind of first steps for those people that are like right here. Somebody's like, "Oh, I have a mini Australian Shepherd that goes crazy on walks, just choke herself." And I had somebody else comment like, "Okay, I've tried a long lead, but they're still pulling at the end of it. It's just
Mm.
chaotic." Like, what's kind of a couple first steps to address that if I'm the pet parent in that situation?
Sure. So I really prefer a harness over a collar. So I would have the dog wearing a harness if they're really really pulley and you can't handle it attached to the front. Although often I attach to the back so they've got free range of motion. And then an actionable item is basically um, to so practice slow stop. So get the leash skills down. So basically the slow stop is that you're gradually bringing the dog to a stop again versus suddenly stopping it. There's video on my YouTube channel. There's also some video in that stop pulling class. There's also a free handout in the handouts site. Um, anyway, and then changing directions often, working at the edges of a space. So if your dog is pulling a lot, chances are you might be in an area where all of the interesting things are somewhere else. So you can just scatter some treats around. You can walk close to the bushes. You can be in an area of tall grass versus short grass. And that gives the dogs kind of something to do besides for just like zooming off to the next big thing.
Do you think it's advisable or recommended to start like at home? Like if the dog is seeming, for lack of a better term, out of control on leash, and the pet parents like just like falling over,
Mm-hmm.
just staying at home and working on
Mm-hmm.
focus on the activities, bringing that energy level down with some enrichment. I mean, is that stuff pretty
Mm-hmm.
important before we even go out and leash, I imagine?
Yeah, those are all great things. So, working on relationship in general. So, I mean, leash skills are one thing, right? But zooming back to a relationship that of trust is really helpful. So, looking at anything that your dog might sort of want in the world, like if they're wanting to go outside, then put some bells on the door so they can ask to go outside rather than just kind of waiting on you to decide when to open the door. If you have a back garden. Um, or if it's mealtime, a way for them to they sit and then that gives you a chance to put the food down. Or working on, there's all kinds of places that you can put consent into your work. So they also have sort of consent over when you pet them, for example. And we can circle back to that, but basically kind of working on this relationship of trust. And you can even do something like Kathy Sadeo's smart times 50 which I really enjoy. And so basically, you take 50 treats, 50 of their like regular dog food kibbles, put them in a jar, and throughout the day, anything that you like, you give a treat for it. So use up all 50 of your treats within the day, and then after a week or two, you have a dog who's consistently starting to offer you more of the behaviors that you liked. So if you're like, "Ooh, I liked it when you jumped off the couch," you just say yes and you give a treat. Or does this? Yes, give a treat. So see, mark, and reward training is what SMART stands for with Kathy Sedano.
I love that. It reminds me of a quote, and maybe it was her who said this, that reward the behavior you want more of, basically is what the quote was. Like, if you want more of something, reward it. And I love that idea of, and that's so actionable. I think that would be helpful in general, is just having this like treat jar, and like you said, rewarding anytime they do something good. Or I just leave treat jars around the house randomly, and I don't necessarily go up to 50. I should try that one day. And then same thing, when I capture a behavior or I see a behavior I like, I try to capture that. Although it's funny because now the dogs will go sit and like kind of look at the treat jar and like try to offer behavior. It's so
Like I'm doing this thing.
yeah, they're like, this is where the treat jar is, so I have to move it around. But I love that you brought up a second ago consent, because I think that's a concept. I know you talk about it in BAT, which I think is so cool in your book. Again, it'll be linked below for anybody watching, that it's empowering pet parents to give their dogs choice. And it's so counterintuitive, because we think that we give our dogs choice, they're in charge, they're not listening, et cetera, but it kind of has the opposite effect. But I guess, can you talk a little bit about that and then what consent means?
Yeah, and I think one thing, I'm trying to remember the context in which or the original quote was for, but basically, like, choice isn't pie. Like, the freedom for your dog isn't pie. Like, if they have some, it doesn't mean you can't have any. Like, so it's like love. You give some away, and there's actually more of it. And so empowering them to make choices that are more, that fit for your family actually helps overall. And I'm sorry, can you rewind to tell me the question again? I've
Yeah.
got
So no, well, it was a long-winded question. So my question is, let's go back to consent. What
yeah,
does
yeah.
that mean? That's a concept that was fairly novel to me, and I
Mhm.
think a lot of the community. And I think it's really powerful.
Thanks. Yeah, it was new when I was first teaching it, and now it's sort of cut off on like wildfire, which is great. And basically, the notion is that just like humans, dogs have the capacity to say yes or no for, say, physical contact to them or getting into their space. So basically, like for petting, for example, I use a more please signal. So the consent for petting would be like, are you kind of go up to the dog, like, are you ready for some petting? Like you might do a play bow or be near them with your hands or whatever. And then you'll see some sort of signal, some behavior from them saying, yeah, more please. So they'll kind of like go closer to you or initiate, right? So an enthusiastic yes, we would say in the dance community. And so there's an enthusiastic yes to your offer of physical contact. And then you go in and you scritch them. So this is the 5 second rule. So scritch for no more than 5 seconds, hands off. And then you see if they're like, yeah, more please. And so they move in, you can pet some more. And so you just keep at it. At any point, either of you can just say that you're done. So this is my all done signal. So you can say I'm all done and be done, or they can say they're all done by not reinitiating once you put your hands away. And it was something, oh, go ahead.
No, no, no. Please continue.
Something that I found really interesting is that part of the way that dogs are, for all the dogs I've ever tried this with, is pretty much if you're still petting them, they will stay there, even though they don't like it. So the moment you move your hands away, they're like, whew, and like they stop, right? But they're kind of like frozen. So consent is a revocable thing, but apparently not so much in the dog world. So like you have to then say, hey, are you still consenting? And then go back in if they say yes. And that can be applied to nail trims and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and that's something I had to learn the hard way. In fact, I got called out quite a bit on social media because I was posting video a while ago, videos of Marlo being like, "Oh, she wants me to continue petting her," basically. And what she was doing is she was opening up her belly to me, and I was like, "Oh,
Mm,
cute. She wants me to." And I got roasted, which is fair. I'm here to learn, not to be right.
mhm.
And saying, "No, she's actually asking you to stop." And so I've now learned with her. And at first I was like, no, she loves it because she loves her belly to be rubbed. But now I've learned if I'm petting her, I follow your 5-second rule and I stop and she leans in or nudges me with her nose, she wants more or she gets pausy. But if she stays by me and opens up her belly to me, usually her back legs, what I find is if I stop, she closes her belly, goes back to sleep, and lays next to me and is fine. If I don't stop, she
Mm.
gets up and leaves. So I've really had to learn with her that even though she was physically opening up to me, that was her saying, no, thank you. So I think
Mhm.
that that kind of body language can be really confusing to pet parents.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That particular thing is what Sarah Cal and I would call a tap out. So it's a way. It's like I'm little, please don't kill me,
Oh,
sort of.
yeah, that's what she was doing. Oh gosh, it breaks my heart, but
Well,
we're
but
learning. We're
we
learning.
live and we learn, right? And
Yeah.
so I mean, I think social media can be really harsh on people. And so, I mean, pointing things out that need changing, right? Speaking up for the voiceless is great. And I hope that nobody actually shamed you. Like that, it's like we're all doing our best and we're
Yeah.
learning. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it was definitely, I have a lot of trainers that follow and they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. She's just so cute in her little belly. um, and I think, a couple other common body language things that I've now learned are kind of the side eye or getting stiff or the lip licking or the ears back. I've just really trying to been studying my dog. And now here's the problem, Grisha, I can't unsee it. So I
Yeah.
have friends all the time sending me cute videos of dogs. One of my best friends, who actually is the one who told me about you so long ago, she was like, "Stop sending these cute little animal videos because I can't see how uncomfortable that dog is. The dogs with the little babies or whatever, and the
Mhm.
dogs
Yeah.
letting it happen." But they're giving so many warnings, and I think that's one of the most underrated things as a pet parent that we need to learn and be aware of because as many years as I've worked with dogs, more on the nutrition side, still like I was missing signals in my own dog. Like that's pretty scary or
Mhm.
sad, I should say.
Well, I think we assign meaning to something, and then once we have that, it's sort of frozen in time. And I think that's one of the reasons that can be hard to shift over from more punishment based training as well, is that people have a different set of interpreting body language as like, oh, this is a good thing, this is appeasing because you're the alpha, and so we should be seeing more of this. And so it's that verbiage gets sort of stuck. And so then even probably as you're shifting over, lots of people think that belly exposure is a good thing. So totally reasonable that you would have as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
The going back to consent, one thing just to share with those watching, I have started and I told you about this, Grisha, a cooperative care class. It's like a training group class. So for those watching, something like that could be interesting to look for in your area because in there, I've had one session so far, but the entire class is based on consent and how we can give our dogs opportunities to, as you said, say no and tap out, which is again very counterintuitive, especially with Marlo. Like who she doesn't like to be groomed and she needs to be because she's part poodle doodle backyard bred puppy mill.
Mhm.
And nail clippings are really tough for her. And truth be told, in the beginning, I would just kind of do it. And oh, Grisha, my trainer a long time ago, she was like, I mentioned that I groomed Marlo the other night, and she's like, oh, well, what was her body language like? I was like, oh, she's fine. She just laid there and let me do it. And she's like, oh, okay, let's talk through what that looks like. And I later learned she wasn't fine. She was shutting down and she was just allowing it to happen, which is really like, even though she was terrified and scared, and I'm sure that impacted our relationship. And I've since changed from that. But that's something else that I think a lot of us do as pet parents. We don't realize we're doing it. And to your point earlier, that can potentially really impact our relationship.
Mhm. Absolutely. And so for folks who are listening, I do actually have a cooperative care class online. So we have about 140
Ah,
classes. And so one is cooperative care. We have two more about husbandry. So different ways to get harnesses on with consent and brushing with consent. And then we also have one on eye drops, how to put those in. And Yes. Oh, and one specifically for grooming. So, and that's more oriented at groomers to be able to sort of see what body language to look for and how to specifically get used to the specific tools of grooming. So that may be something useful for you as well.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome. I'll have to check that out. So let's jump over to barking. This is another one I get a lot of, and it's kind of tied into leash, right? Like barking on leash at dogs, people, but even barking out the window, barking at the front door. Can you, first off, why do you think we as pet parents struggle with this?
Well, so I just realized I read something yesterday that the crying baby is the one of the few sounds that humans don't habituate to, and I think dogs barking is kind of in the same realm as the crying baby, right? It hits our brain as like, I can't handle this. And part of the reason that it's so hard to work through is that either A, we're not sort of keeping our cool and being resourced and following the training plans. So a lot of times people will sort of shift away um, from a training plan in the moment that sort of somebody just shows up at the house. Or that we don't have a training plan that's robust enough to handle all of the real life. Um, so things like if somebody does just show up, having a little note on your door that says, I'm here. It's going to take me 30 seconds to get to the door, so please be patient, right? And then that's when you do whatever it is that you're wanting with the dog. So like you grab their Kong and you give it to them, or you throw a handful of treats on the floor, or you put them in the back bedroom so you can be at the door without them hearing. So these are for dogs that are kind of in that first moment of working through reactivity at the barking in the house. Um, we sort of cocoon them. We try to make it so that they're not having something to react to, and that's a lot of work at the beginning. The good thing is that the actual training process then makes it so you don't have to do that forever, but there's a management aspect to it. So and then there's also like people walking by they can bark at, or sounds, and there's a whole range of triggers, and so figuring out all those different places and how to cocoon the dog during those times.
Yeah, in your book, you mentioned creating a safe environment is critical to this success, which and using management temporarily, whether it be baby gates or, for example, with Marlowe, she gets really nervous with new people, and so especially in the house. So I put her. She has a crate, and that is her safe space. And that goes in a back room, and I have people come in and they do not interact with her at all. And um, just being in the same house is kind of how we're desensitizing. They don't go up to the crate. And there's a few friends that she's more comfortable with. And so I just have to actively manage her, because the crazy thing, and maybe this might be helpful for somebody else watching this, is with a few of the friends that will come over that Marlo's more comfortable with or getting comfortable with, she will run up to them and almost kind of get in their face, maybe want to crawl on them. But then all of a sudden she gets stuck and then she starts barking and it makes the person nervous. And so I had to learn the hard way that if I have her out working, I mean, I have it at a distance, I keep her focused on me, I have a leash on her. And anytime she runs up to somebody, even though she seems like she wants to go say hi, I call her right back to me and then scatter or toss a tree in the opposite direction so that she learns that she can get away. Which again was counterintuitive, because at first I'm like, oh, she wants to go say hi, and that didn't end well. So, what are your thoughts on that approach?
Mhm. Yes, I think that's all really helpful. Definitely calling her back. That those moments when they get stuck, it's sort of like, I can't choose, please help me.
Yes.
And that's what we're there for. We're the parachute for our dogs. And if we co-regulate. So if their nervous systems can't regulate, then we help them, just like any other part of a family would do if you're sort of healthy. And so one thing that can help is to go on a walk beforehand. And I don't know if this is something that you works in your space, but if you have people that she is more comfortable with, going on a walk around the block together, so they're in the front and then you kind of gradually catch up.
Right.
And then once you get in, then they go in first, they sit down, so they're easy for her, and then you come in, and then you're still kind of doing that routine that you're doing now. That's usually all pretty helpful.
Yeah.
Depends on the dog, right? So if any of you watching are like, oh my god, my dog will bite people if I do that, then don't do that, right? So
Yeah.
this is like flying a helicopter. We don't want to like, do things that are just, outside of the range of our skill. So, and or the dog's capacity. So,
Yes. And that's why I always recommend like finding, a dog trainer locally for a lot of these people with a lot of reactivity. I do think that these online courses and social media can be really helpful. And as somebody who shares tips, right? Like I'm working with people locally and I'm still learning stuff new. So I think that's really telling. Do you still take clients or are you just completely booked up? Because I know you're in
you know,
Oregon.
Yeah. So, I mean, the online school basically has me full time.
Yeah.
And so I work for free for some people just to sort of keep my hand in,
Sure.
actually. And that way I don't feel obligated.
Yeah.
Because,
I love that. You're like, all right, I'll help you, but I'm not feeling it today. So we'll meet next
yeah,
week. Yeah.
exactly. I have to say, like,
Good
I'm,
for
I'm
you.
at that point in my career that I'm like, no, I don't want to anymore. And so, but yeah, so I love recommending to local folks. I think it's really important to have somebody with eyes on the dog, particularly if you're dealing with a dog who's got a bite history or capacity for biting, or even just if you're working, like if you have a puppy and you want to socialize that puppy, having somebody's eyes on is so invaluable. So, for example, I have a directory. So directory.grishastewart.com is a directory of all positive trainers who've signed this is a big code of ethics that they go by. And then we also have certified bat instructors. So if people are really looking for kind of next level, the knowledge and skilled assessed or the knowledge assess instructors.
What are a couple key questions that if we're looking around, let's say that your directory, there's nobody near me,
Mhm.
but I still want to find a positive trainer.
Right.
What are some questions I can ask to kind of weed out? Because what the reason I'm asking is uh, it took me a long time you and I talked about that, to find trainers that really I resonated with, trusted, and followed practices, honestly, that you teach. And I had a lot of trainers say, oh, yeah, I'm positive reinforcements. It's all positive. It's all positive. And then I start working with them or talking to them more, and it wasn't. So, what are some questions that we could ask to like really make sure that we're working with the right kind of person?
Mhm. That is a great question. And let me say that if for some reason that you get a no on these, like you keep asking and like it's no, 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 no all around your area, finding someone who at least does online consultations is super
Okay.
helpful. So it's still a personal person who can then, you take your phone out on your sessions and they're looking at what your dog is doing. So that's still eyes on.
Love that.
So whether it's somebody that's online or in person, I would ask, like, so rather than using a catchphrase like "Are you positive?" I would say, what would you do in this scenario? Like, what would you do if the dog barks? What do what So it gets some like how to kind of things, and if any of them involve putting pressure or force on the dog, then that's your sign that it's not really positive reinforcement based. Um, and so that's one thing. I mean, but you could also certainly ask up front, like, what's your philosophy, right? That's a good start. And when you're interviewing a trainer, you don't want to, it's not for getting free advice, but just say, so keep in mind
Mhm.
that you're not like trying to get, a free session out of them.
Yeah.
So don't ask questions that are like your whole answer of what you're trying to solve. But yeah. And so like, who are some of your heroes, right? So who are you, do you model your training after? What was the last conference you attended? And so there's conferences like Clicker Expo, is a super positive dog training conference. There's pact in the UK. There's lots of conferences that are more positive oriented. And the keywords to look for that tell you they're kind of your red flags are like if they say the word balanced, which sounds like it should be good, and I'd love to reclaim that word, but it's not. It just means kind of a half and half or a blend of punishment and reinforcement. Um, or like alpha or leadership could kind of go either way, but generally speaking, that's not the best word to see in a description. If their website doesn't have a philosophy, that's usually not the best sign, because they are a lot of times people don't want to say outright that they use punishment. Looking at the pictures of the dogs on their website. So if the dogs A, have happy body language, and B, they're not wearing gear. Um, yeah. So, and things like electronic collars, right? So you'd want to be avoiding those, avoiding the prong collars, that sort of thing.
And what
Or I
about
would want you to be avoiding those. You may want to
yeah.
go all out for those, but that's
And what about like Well, I think what I was thinking when you're saying this is I feel like these questions could apply if you're going to use like a dog sitter, or somebody to come walk your dog, and even a dog groomer. I know you mentioned that you have
Yes.
information for groomers, but are there any specific questions that we should be asking our groomers?
Right. So I would say a good question for a groomer would be, how is my dog able to say stop?
Oh,
And
okay.
if they're like, your dog doesn't have a way to say stop, we tether him to the table and this happens, then that tells you that they're not using the most advanced, consent based techniques. Um, Try to figure out what do they, ask them what body language they look for to see if your dog is stressed, right? And so they may have that or they may not. With the more please signal, for example, for grooming, there's some behavior that the dog can do that says keep going. And if they stop doing that, usually then that means stop. So that's one way that you can, one sort of answer that a groomer could give is like, well, if they keep their chin on the surface, then I can keep brushing. And if they take their chin off, then I'll stop. Or if I see, other signs of distress, then I'll stop. Yeah.
I don't think that that's commonly talked about in the grooming world at all.
No, no, there are, yeah, it's a thing, but it's not hugely out there yet. So, but groomers can learn just like anybody else. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
That's
it,
that's pretty powerful. And it's actually that kind of gets me all in the feels because I feel like that could really be transformative for a lot of dogs and groomers and their pet parents to really just change the way we think about it. Because, well, okay, let me ask you this. What would you say? And I know this is probably a big question, so I know more of a general answer is fine, but what if I need to get something done on my dog? Like need to grab something out of their paw and they're terrified of it or something. Like what would you say is like the least aversive way? Or example, let's say I'm very lucky that Marlo doesn't really mat because grooming is very stressful for her. But let's say that she matted really bad, and I had to groom, to get a mat out that was going to hurt her. What is the least aversive way to do that, or is that even the right way to think about it?
so I think it's a reasonable way to think about it. I mean, obviously avoiding it in the first place, right? So
Yeah.
getting, brushing frequently enough and whatnot. And that sometimes we do have to take something out of their trust account. Like it's not a perfect world, right? Sometimes we do something to them. They're like, hey, I didn't really like that. And so if you do something that in which they don't have consent, then, try to make the next week extra, be extra attuned to their nose. So that's one thing. The other is, keeping your body calm, being relaxed. I mean, because sometimes, like, they have a hypodermic needle in their mouth or something. Like, you have to just like you have to take it, you have to take stuff away. I mean, I've never had a dog with a hypodermic needle, but that's my like go-to example of when you don't like train the drop, you just go steal the thing. Um, and yeah, and so you just keep your body calm, approach from the side, move slowly rather than like a rapid thing. Make sure your breathing is calm, and then give her a big treat or reinforcer afterward.
That's pretty.
And if they need, I mean, if it's like a dog who might bite you, then obviously putting safety precautions in. But sometimes like vet care, right? They need something, but
Mhm,
there's a whole like fear-free handling,
mhm.
protocol out there.
This stuff is just mind blowing to me, and I wish it was. It is mainstream, but at the same time, it's not. Like I've been in dog training classes, mostly with my 14-year-old lab for most of his life. Like I did all the training, and none of this was really talked about until my more recent years that I'm really hearing about it. So I'm really excited that we're doing this because I think this is I don't know. I just want to help push this amazing movement that you've spearheaded forward because I think overall it's better for us and the animals.
Mhm. Absolutely. And it takes all of us, and it's fantastic that you're using your platform for this and getting the word out there. And there's so many trainers now around the world that are sort of like recognizing the value of consent and compassion and agency. And yeah. So, oh, and sorry, before I lose the
Yeah,
thought,
please.
the grooming question you have, that
Yes.
specific question was asked, I think, in the grooming webinar. So, and the lady who
Oh,
does it is a British groomer. So there might be a more specific answer that she would give.
oh, I love that. And speaking of trainers, who are your heroes? Dog training heroes.
So many. So like Kathy Sadeo, Chirag Patel. Oh gosh, my brain is short on words. I can see all their faces. Susan Friedman. Um, uh, gosh,
Way to put
yeah,
you on the
lots
spot.
of people. Yeah, no, they're just a billion. Basically, the way to find a lot of my heroes is to go to my website because I'm like, I want them to be the teaching, right? So I always hire people that are smarter than me to help get the word out about their thing. And so I'm like, just yeah, it's full of people who are great speakers. So
I love that. And then my final question is,
also Sindor Pungal, sorry, is my like current like fangirl.
who was that?
Sindor Pungal.
Oh, I've never
Uh,
heard.
she her specialty is streeties. So she gives a lot of webinars about street dogs in India, but then she also has a whole online school also. She's great. I really love her approach. So
Oh, that's awesome.
it
I've
really
actually
it
never heard of
blends
her.
nicely with what we do.
That's beautiful. And by the way, I just love how open, accepting, compassionate you are in general. Like it seems like you're like that with obviously humans, but then dogs, of course. I think that makes your content more digestible. So yeah, so thank you for that. And my final question is, what is what is something that you want a pet parent really struggling with reactivity to take away from this? If you could give them like one sentence.
I would say you can do this. This is hard, and like keep the faith. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that encouragement because it is possible and you've proven it time and time again that even with positive reinforcement, the most extreme cases can see significant improvement, which I think, the proof is in the pudding.
Mhm. Absolutely.
That said, okay, so I'm going to have all of your information, the courses and webinars that you've mentioned and your book, Bat, linked in the description below. And again, friendly reminder, you are so graciously offering a free copy of your book to my community for a limited time, code Fusaro. It's all linked in the description. So I really hope everyone can take advantage of that, join up for your courses. Is there any specific online assets or resources you want to make sure that we call out?
I would just wanted to say that the two things. One, the Bat book, I've never given that away for free before. That was like a surprise to me that my school
Oh,
admin gave that
well,
to you.
there you
So
go.
congratulations.
Yeah.
So get that while you can. And then the other thing is, so we have a diamond membership basically, and our membership people can access all of the classes. They get in the directory and all kinds of things. It's a huge resource for I think it's $39.99 a month. So and then we also have a library version that's a little less expensive. So
Beautiful. Yeah,
yeah, and we
absolutely
have
worth
the
the
best
investment.
people. Like they're so kind. The students are lovely. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, yeah, no, you're fine. I was just saying it's worth the investment. Like everything you do, everything you touch seems to be magical, and so I'm so grateful that you exist in this world and share what you've learned because it really is transforming the way that we work with our pets. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Can I do? Sorry, can I say
Oh,
one more
oh
thing?
yeah, no, please say it all.
I just totally forgot also that we just transformed our scholarship program. So we have a 6 month scholarship program for need based. So that's still available. We do that twice a year for the diamond membership. But we also just opened it up so that all people of the global majority get a lifetime membership. So just basically completely removing the paywall for folks that have been historically disadvantaged. So yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Again, another reason why I'm fangirling that I get to have you here. Like, I don't think you realize how much I look up to you. So, thank you so much again for all
Rachel.
you do. Yeah. And I hope that I don't live too far from you. So, I will eventually, I've got to make a trip up. We've got to meet in person because I think it would just be pretty powerful.
That sounds great.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. And for those watching, don't forget to subscribe. Please share this. This is going to help inform the world. This is the kind of message that needs to get out there. So, whatever you do, if you got any value from this, please share this with your